Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining our webinar today. Today we'll be looking at understanding the new Digital Management of Fire Safety Information Standard, easy for me to say, or BS8644-1. So this will be presented by myself and my colleague Steve Rudge. So just briefly introducing myself, I work as the Business Area Director here for the Construction Division. As you can see, this is what I looked like before I had a small child during the lockdown period. So things haven't gone well for me since then, but I really look at helping customers adopt technology and process change in order to make them work smarter. So we have a sort of world-class delivery team here and a great sales team who also support me in doing that with our customer base. I'll let Steve introduce himself properly a bit later on, but he's head of consulting here for the construction team. He's been in the industry for over 25 years, very well established in and got a great understanding in BIM. So he is very well positioned to take on the Building Safety Act and the associated fire safety regulations. So if I just run through the agenda quickly, what I want to do first is look at how we got here, why we're here, why there is a Building Safety Act, why the British standards been brought in around fire safety. Look at Symetri and how we fit into this. Steve will then go into a bit more detail around the actual standard and the Act and how they work together. And then we'll look at how he can help and how we can ensure that organizations remain compliant in the delivery of construction projects. And then we'll look at possible next steps for ourselves and for you guys in this space. So if we look at why we're here, I think, obviously a massive driving factor is the Grenfell Tower fire tragedy. It was an absolute disaster. When the investigation into that was conducted, it was found that unsafe materials had been used. There hadn't been the proper capture of data during the construction process, so nobody was finding out who was accountable was very difficult. So off the back of that, Dame Judith Hackitt produced a report on the building regulations and fire safety, which was very critical of the current processes, and also looked at creating an act, the Building Safety Act, in order to make those processes more robust, allow us to capture the data that's needed during the construction process, and giving a clear audit trail through the golden thread of information in order for us to see who's done what when, and make sure that the proper steps have been taken. And providing that audit trail, providing accountability. In order to execute against that Building Safety Act, especially around fire safety, the British standards have the British standard has been put out around digital management of fire safety information. So the Building Safety Act and the Digital Management of Fire Safety Information British Standard are things that Steve will go into in a lot more detail. Other factors, sort of outside of that investigation, the creation of legislation, are that there has been a patchy implementation of BIM standards over the last 5-10 years. What we see is inconsistent data being produced and a disconnection of the BIM information collected during the project. So if we look at the golden thread of information, it's been very much broken. It's been in parts. Architects have typically been the best adopters or the earliest adopters of BIM. If I talk at a very general level, there are some great contractors who have adopted it very early and some great owners who have adopted it very early. But typically architects have been good in terms of capturing all the BIM data, doing all they're supposed to, and passing it on to contractors. Contractors were slower to adopt BIM practices, and owner occupiers have been even slower. So what that's meant is there's been patchy siloed collections of data, and it hasn't been used as it's supposed to post handover to really drive benefit for owners and occupiers. So the first iteration of sort of BIM projects, owners and developers have put together sort of EIRs, AIRs, declaring what they want. And that data has been collected by the architect. It's not really been passed down the chain. And then by the time it gets to the owners, they didn't know what they asked for, and they've not been able to utilize that. Having gone through a few iterations of building buildings within a state, owner-occupiers have begun to get smarter. They have begun to specify the data that they want at the end of the process, and architects and contractors have continued to deliver that data. So we are slowly getting better at this process. And Symetri have been helping, right? So we've been supporting owners in writing EIRs and AIRs that help them actually collect data that they can use in their facilities management solutions post handover. We've supported architects in creating and contractors creating BEPs and making sure they deliver to the owner's specifications, whether that be COBie or whether that be more defined by the actual owners and occupiers themselves. What I think is the British Safety Act and some of the gateways within that are really going to enforce BIM. So rather than public sector companies going to the government saying we've got a BIM plan, give us our funding, and then it all falling apart a little bit, the fact that they have to get through these gateways that I'll come on to in a little bit more detail in a second means that they will execute against that BIM plan. The data that they said they wanted at the start of the process is the data they will get at the end of the process, and the data they will continue to use post handover into the occupation phase and beyond. And the BSI standard is really going to be key in terms of how we do that. You know, the British Safety Act forces people to collect that fire data throughout the process, and the standards is a great example of how it should be done by each party in the process. And I think that's also a key point, that this, rather than being the BIM standard, which sort of sat with architects, slowly crept in contractors, and then went to owner occupiers, I think every party has to be involved and understand their role in the collection of data throughout the process now. Otherwise, the project doesn't get completed, the project doesn't get started even. And that's what we sort of come on to around the gateways. You know, with the Building Safety Act now, there are three key gateways. There's a planning stage. It's really kind of come into place through town and country planning anyway, where fire safety matters have to be considered, they have to be taken into account, and they have to be documented. The construction phase is even more key, because you're not allowed on site, you're not allowed to start the process of building a building until your fire safety, fire materials, and plan for maintaining the golden thread have been communicated to the regulator and it has been approved. And then occupation, the owner can't actually take the keys, get in there and start using their building until they've shown that the planned collection of data, the planned changes, everything has been signed off by the regulator, and the data and the golden thread has been maintained throughout the process. So if you've got owners who can't take control of their buildings, contractors who can't get on site, and designers who can't start planning until they've done all these things, then it becomes more core to the whole process. And the golden thread actually, you know, it has teeth. It's not a checkbox exercise anymore. We're going to do a BIM project. You have to collect that data right the way through the process. So how does Symetri fit into this? Symetri is for those of you who don't know, is a sort of becoming a global organization. We've just purchased a company called Microdesk in the US. We're a very large reseller of Autodesk products, but more and more focused around consultancy. So we've got 400 consultants scattered across the globe now. And what we aim to do is help architectures, engineer, manufacturing, and construction businesses work smarter. So we look at processes, we look at data collection, we look at the software they've adopted, and try to look at how we can make the spend on technology more effective, the processes they use more effective, and help their organization run more efficiently. Just three of the main focus areas we have are implementation, and I'll start from right to left. Implementation and adoption of technology. This is where we've been very strong historically. We have a lot of we provide a lot of Autodesk software. There's no getting away from that. We provide a lot of other software solutions now as well. And we provide the training, support, and consultancy around the successful adoption of technology. You know, it's all very well spending a fortune getting the best tech, but if your guys don't know how to use it and there isn't process in place, then it's not very valuable. More and more now we're involved in project support, so a lot of our team will work on site, shoulder to shoulder with clients in BIM delivery. So running as outsourced BIM managers throughout a project. We may support clients in developing their documentation around EIRs, AIRs, and we may do some of the auditing at the end of the process to make sure the right data has been captured and handed over. And then more and more, we're getting into the digital transformation piece. So sitting down with clients in the AEC and MFG spaces and evaluating the technology they've got, evaluating what they want to achieve as a business, and looking at how we use the technology they've got better, or complement that technology, or change processes in order to allow them to maximize their investment in the technology they've purchased. Mention some of the solutions very briefly. We partner with a vast number of companies, as you can see below here. So we've got, as I've mentioned a few times, Autodesk. We've got Oculo from the sort of that Steve will go into a bit around actually capturing and proving that data has been used during a construction. What we say has been done has actually been done during the construction process. And where the technology available doesn't fill the gaps, there are gaps in the technology available, we create our own applications. So we've got Naviate and Civilia, which sit on top of Revit and the manufacturing solutions Vault and things like that, and they make those products work more effectively. So taking processes that typically take 20 minutes, reducing them down to 1 minute, and helping, as I say, to keep making businesses more efficient and effective. So are we experts? I think that's a pretty good question to look at as well. In a BIM management world, yes, we've been doing BIM management, depending who you ask, for the last 25 years. If you put together the experience our consultants have, it's high hundreds of years, if not 1,000 years worth of BIM management experience across the business, across those 400 consultants. Are we experts in technology? Absolutely. We know the best technology solutions to adopt on construction sites. We know how technology can be adopted most effectively in order to help. Are we experts in the Building Safety Act, and are we experts in this new fire standard from BSI? Probably not yet. I think it's probably arrogant and probably too early to have an expert in a Building Safety Act, which has been in position for 6 months. I think the British standard's been released officially for a couple of weeks. We understand how that impacts projects. We understand how the BIM process can feed into that. You know, COBie data capture and all that kind of thing can be used to help organizations meet the Building Safety Act requirements and meet the standard that's been issued. But this Safety Act and this British standard will evolve over the next few months, few years. That's been written into both of them. And I think we will continue to work with organizations to deliver as best they can against these standards. I know there's been an open letter issued criticising some of the elements of the BS8644-1, and some of the points in that are very valid, and I'm sure the British standards will take that into consideration as the standard evolves. So I will say we are very well positioned to help. We are very well, we understand these things, but I guess what we're keen to do is say that we want to work with people, we want to work with architects, contractors and owners to really deliver as best we can and keep helping them negotiate and navigate the legislation and the standards. So without further ado, I will hand over to Mr. Steve Rudge to talk through how we deliver against this.
Okay, thanks, Rich. Right, okay, let's get into the detail of the standard and the Building Acts and see what we've got to do and deliver. So, as we said, my name is Steve Rudge. I've worked in industry many years. I think my first BIM project was 1987, and that was on the 2 nuclear reactors, Heysham and Torness. Exactly the same principles, same processes we're using today. Yeah, just different ways of doing it, different technology. Revit wasn't around in those days. And I've obviously been in the consulting world now for about 13 years, helping designers, contractors and owner operators develop technical platforms, processes and delivery to meet requirements, etc. Okay, so as Rich said, the disastrous day of the 14th of June 2017, when the refrigerator in a private unit set the building on fire at Grenfell. What a tragic day, and I can't believe it's 5 years ago. But following that, obviously, we've mentioned that the Judith Hackitt report was released in December 2018, which then highlighted, as Rich says, the many problems with the information, the materials, everything that was captured and delivered during that refit of the cladding on the Grenfell Tower. And that really resulted in creating a building safety bill. Now, the building safety bill actually was released on the 28th of April this year and now became an act. It got royal assent, which has really put it in the focus. It is still in a 6 months review period, but he's live and he's out there for us to start to follow and react against, really. There are other things that have happened. There's been a golden thread report that you may have read in July 21, which is about this data and how we're going to collate it to assist with that Building Safety Act as it's been released. And other things are happening as well. You know, leaseholders have now been protected, and that protection came in force on the 28th of June, and that's helping them to protect the leaseholder from bad construction methods and materials used before the act came in place. And then obviously on the 29th of July this year, BS8644-1 was released, which is the focus of today. But really, I want to try and bring this together because we've got the Building Safety Act. We've actually still got the Fire Act, which is from 2005. We've got the Golden Thread report, and we've also got the standard of 8644. So I want to bring that together. And really, the Building Safety Act, if we start there, it was really about what it means to the residents. So the Ministry of Housing really issued this statement right at the beginning, and it was really to make residents feel comfortable, that feel that they have a voice for their concerns in any of the materials that use, and they've got visibility of that when they're living in high-rise buildings and things. The building owners themselves, it made sure they had obligations. It makes sure that they've got things in place to show escape routes. They've got safety procedures in place and things like that. And then it even comes down to the built environment industry, the designers, the contractors, probably most of you that's on the call today. And it's really ensuring that we get a great framework in place for design, for construction, for management to provide safer, higher quality homes in the years to come. That was the foundation of the bill itself. But the bill is on a journey. Okay, so the bill was introduced, and on the 28th of April this year, it got royal assent. Now, if you look at this, it's on the government website, this image. There's basically a 12-month period of things that have happened between this April and next April. And it's looking at the regulatory reforms and revisiting that fire safety act that's out there, the older act, not the Building Safety Act, the Fire Safety Act. And then we go from this April 23 through to like October time. This is all then going to come into place, and we'll go through some of these elements because it's really key of how the standard, the golden thread, and the act come together between sort of now and next October in 23, and there'll be key bits that we'll pull out. So please don't forget the Fire Safety Act. That is still live. It got revised last year in April, and we've now got the new Building Safety Act, which was released this year. So we still need to consider both them acts. But if we start focusing on the new one, there's some key points of why that was released. It's to ensure we use digital tools and systems to enable key information to be stored and used effectively to ensure a safer building. You know, we've got now duty holders and accountable people throughout the life cycle of that building, through design, construction, but more importantly to the owner and occupying of that building as well, accountable people. And there's something that's new really that's coming. And looking at recording the original design intent and ensuring that subsequent changes of that building are captured. These are points in the act. I'm not making these up. These are things that are in there that we've got to fulfill. Incorporate all the information needed to understand that building and how it should be managed. You know, that's really key, because if there's any problems in that building, we need to know how to resolve them and what people should do. Make information available to the right people at the right time. we'll come on to that in a bit more, because there's lots we need to do with this information. It's not just passing it over to the client now, we need to share it with other people as well. And the big one at the bottom is put into place a new higher standard of information. That's where BS8644 comes in, how that information should be structured and how we're going to actually push it over. So really, I mean, the act, the standard, the golden thread is all ensuring that we are building projects the way we should have done. You know, if we'd have fulfilled building regulations on Grenfell and on other buildings, we wouldn't be in the place we are now. We should have recorded and tested the materials we're putting, not trying to cut costs and corners to get that over the line for a deadline, etc. We, as a construction industry, we have, you know, responsibility to ensure that we're following standards and making sure we're actually doing it. And the new BS8644 is making us do that. It's a system that's going to be put in place for allowing us to capture data and actually bring this information in a standard way that we can use as the occupier, as the owner, as a maintenance, as the fire officer, all receiving the same data but structured in the right way. So first of all, let's start looking at this golden thread, because as I say, it's not just worth looking at the standard in isolation. The golden thread, the Building Safety Act and the standard itself form a coalition really of standards and information that we need to follow. I mean, the golden thread is a way that we need to create a container, a CDE, a document management system, or something to store this data in a structured way that we can give people access to it. But given the structure, allowing the minimum amount of data to be required. And we'll get into that because the standard starts really defining. And looking at how we exchange that data, but make it as simple and as possible to use going forward. The people who are using this are not technologists. You know, they're not used to using Revit and AutoCAD products and CDEs and, you know, digitally reading things on tablets and phones. The day-to-day people who are living, some elderly, they need to get this information and see it really at the fingertips. And there's a great image really that I found from Symetri, which is really starting to bring this together, because you'll see the yellow bits are really sort of not new, but maybe rebadged roles and responsibilities that we need to do for all our buildings. You know, the building safety regulator, it's not new, but we need to ensure that all our buildings are covered by the regulations, and the Building Safety Act is there. I mean, that was from 1984 when that came in, but we need to consider that on all the buildings. We've now got new roles, you know, duty holders are coming in, and they're right across the project. They need to have responsibility for this information that they're going to collate and make sure the buildings are safe, that we're living in and maintaining, etc. We've still got the client, the contractor, and the designer looking at the different stages of that information that's passed to you. But with higher risk buildings, you know, we've now got this new risk of anything over sort of 18 meters, 7 stories, and I'll come on to that again in a minute, and things that we need to do with accountable people through the different stages and this golden thread of data that we're capturing. So I just thought I'd put this up as a nice image, because I know a lot of you that's probably saying, okay, it's probably what we've been doing for the last 20, 30 years. We do fire plans, we capture data, we pass it over to our clients. It is very similar to what we've done, but it's structured differently. And these things put in place that's more aligned to ISO 19650, that's being brought in as well. How BIM processes can actually help us with this and collate the data correctly, and how we structure that data correctly. So, you know, we are building the way it should. And, you know, the 3 main points out of the Act really is to maintain an account of how that building has been designed and how the design decisions were taken relative to the fire and structural safety. That's what we've got to prove. And we'll get onto these gateways in a minute, because what we have to prove during planning and stage gate 2 is that we've considered that. We've considered those design decisions, and we're capturing the changes and why the changes have happened, but with a fire and structural safety knowledge behind it. We need to ensure that the building is aligned to the latest building and safety regulations. How are we doing that? We need to prove it. We need the evidence behind that. And evidence is digitally captured to show how those materials and how the building was constructed. So it's not just as-built information. We need to see this thing being constructed, and we need to capture it and evidence it, so we've got proof of how all the fire stopping has been put into place and what materials we've actually used and who's installed them and who's that accountable person. Now, you may have heard different stories going around about, well, is it up for buildings over 18 metres and 7 stories and all that good stuff? Well, the Fire Safety Act really is covering this side of it, because if you've got a building with 2 or more residents and a common area in it, we've got to start looking at fire risk assessments and information that, that needs to be provided to those residents with fire instructions, escape routes and all that good stuff. And residents' fire door information. So there's a small amount of information on these lower accommodated buildings and things like that. It changes slightly when we get, between 11 metres and 17.9 metres, because there's other things that we need to start checking. Fire doors need to come in place. All the intermittent strips and things like that need to be qualified. And it's only when we get to 18 metres and 7 stories above do we need to really embrace the Act and start looking at the fire plans and building plans and all the equipment and wayfinding signage and all that good stuff. So there's probably a little confusion about where it is. And the confusion is right, really, because when the building safety bill was released, it was stated that any building over 10 stories or more was in the bill and had to be delivered against this new Act when it came out and the standards and all that. That soon changed because of the undefined structure of 10 stories, because obviously heights of each room could be completely different. So it changed and it evolved to 18 metres or at least 7 stories. And then it evolved again because then it included hospitals and care homes. So you can see there's some confusion already out there about, what this Act and the standards and all that started to really cover. But it's really anything over 18 metres with residential, more than 2 residents in it, 7 stories, and hospitals and care homes as well. Okay. Now, if anything is below 18 metres, there are new thresholds introduced. The sprinkler systems need to go in anything over 11 metres. And the Fire Safety Act now has given, this to ensure it applies to external walls, balconies and windows and flat entrance doors, in multiple occupied residential buildings as well. So we just need to ensure that whatever you're working on, whatever you're looking to tender for, plan for, etc., you're making sure that we've got the Act in place and you're aware of what you need to deliver as a client, as a contractor and as a designer, which we'll get into in a moment. I'll come back to this because this is key really to where we are. And I've highlighted 4 real key bits that's going to happen. Now, regulatory reforms is in place. Yeah, that came into place this year. We need to start doing that, and I'll explain what that means. Between April next year and October, so it is 18 months after Royal Assent, we need to start doing other things. New duties and accountable people need to be in place. These gateways that Rich mentioned earlier need to be in place, and the golden thread of information aligned to the new standard BS8644 need to be in place. So what do they mean? Well, really, when you start looking at the regulatory reforms order, which is Fire Clause 134, we need to have additional people with duties and responsibilities. They need to be accountable for what's happening in that building. Yeah, the competent person needs to be aligned to another standard, BS8670. They need to ensure they've got the right qualifications and everything that they can carry out what needs to be carried out. And additional information. Now, you may have heard of this Fire IE. It's similar to Kobe, and I'll underline similar because I'll get into that in a moment, of capturing data against the assets within the building. And as we come down, we've got to look at digitally capturing evidence of that building. We can't just produce as-built drawings anymore. We need to capture evidence and also ensure we've got a single source of truth. So that means, not using emails and that. It's coming back to ISO 19650, where we introduce a common data environment and produce a storage system where we can collate this data and then share it with those right people. And consider the handover of that digital data. Who's it going to? How are they going to access it? How are we going to collate it? That's all part of the regulatory reform order. And then we get into these accountable people that's going to be introduced. Now, you know, we sort of look at who they are and what they need, but they need to take responsibility for the steps to prevent major incidents. They conduct assessments, fire risk assessments. They maintain and update the prescribed information that's handed over and the needed information. It needs to be retained, because it's not just handing it over at the end of a job and then start doing maintenance, because it's all out of date. They need to keep this up to date. And, you know, they need to provide a copy of this as well in a sealed, secure firebox at the entrance of the facility for the fire officer. And in there will be the fire plans, escape routes, materials used, all that will be in that box. Okay, so that's what the accountable person's role is. We'll quickly move on to the stage gates as well, because they're key into this and part of the standard as well. So these new stage gates, phase 1 is active. It came active in August 21. That means that all our planning needs to consider safety, regulations, and all that good stuff to get it through planning at the moment. So please be aware of that's now in place, and the fire safety information and regulation needs to be defined for stage gate 1 to even get through planning now. Stage gate 2 and 3 will come into force between April and October next year. That's that timeline from April to October, and is obviously for projects over that 18 meters or 7 stories. But it's really key that we understand what these 3 stage gates are, but focusing on 2 and 3. Because as Rich says, Gateway 2 is allowing us to proceed on site. If we do not show that how we're capturing this data, how we're aligning to the golden thread, how we've embracing the building regulations, we will not receive something called a building assurance certificate. If we do not have that certificate, we cannot proceed on site. Okay, so it's key to ensure you've got your digital processes, your information requirements all defined to get through the stage gate 1. Okay, that gateway is really key and it really needs support from the design teams and the contractor to embrace it to really get that pre-construction phase to allow us to actually get on site and start building this facility. Stage gate 3 or gateway 3 is really, as Rich said, you need it before you can actually use that building and move in. Okay, so what we're looking at here is literally showing evidence, making sure that the fire office and appropriate body is willing to sign off the information we're providing. It's structured in the way that's defined in the standard. In the golden thread is apparent. We've proved it all. We know the design decisions and changes that have happened as all defined in there to get the sign off. Okay. And then the 4th one, we've mentioned it many times already, that golden thread of information. Use of digital tools and systems. How are you doing that? Providing all that information to the makeup of that building. We've got to do it. Make the information easy available to the right people, fire officers, residents, clients, all that good stuff post PC. And the golden thread needs to be accurate and up to date. It needs to be as built. We can't produce drawings as we've done in the past when it doesn't truly reflect what we've built. It needs to be accurate and up to date. And it adheres to the standard and it includes fire IE. This is the golden thread of data. And the principles of this is aligned to the standard. Now, there's a golden thread report that's worth reading. And this is about the accurate and trusted data. And you can see many of the things there that's really looking at accountability and, you know, making sure the information is shareable and can be pushed out to others. So yes, we'll have to align to ISO 19650. Yes, we need information containers. Yes, we need something called information exchange points, which I'm going to come through, and fire IE, and align to this new 8644 standard. That's the golden thread, and that's why the standard is underpinning it. But the standard is only the first of 2 parts. Okay, part 1 has been released, part 2 is still in being written and in development. but what it's doing is providing a safer built environment that is appropriate and for that intended end user. Reduce that disruption to business operations and property loss from fire, and enable relevant secure accuracy and accessibility of that fire information to the right people. So it's all about accuracy, it's all about collecting the data, and all about sharing that data. That's the difference with this standard. And I'll come to figure 1, which is part of the standard. And in here, you can start seeing some of the things that are starting to be discussed in here of how we can prevent the fire, what happens during a fire, and what happens post a fire. And it starts looking at the information that's needed during the cycle of a fire, really, in a property. But the main thing is some of the things that need to be in place. To prevent the fire, we need a fire strategy, fire risk assessments, training, tests and drills need to be in place. But if a fire develops, what have we got in there? You know, if we've got fire detection and fire alarms and escape routes defined and firefighting and fire suppression, all that good stuff. And then post a fire, what happens? Do you still have site security? You know, reinstate all those utilities. How's that done? How's the waste going to be removed? That all needs to be considered really as part of the standard itself. And as I say, the golden thread is about all of us. Yeah, it's not just to the architect or the building services people or the fire officer or the fire engineer. We have to embrace it. Now, as a client, an owner operator, we start defining our information requirements in some key documents. If you look at table 1 in the standard, it starts aligning it back to ISO 19650 with our OIRs, AIRs, PIRs and EIRs. These are standard documents that an owner needs and pushes out with tender packs. But what the standard's doing is ensuring, and you can pick some 3 key things out here. You know, if you look at the AIR, we need fire strategies and associated drawings. We need fire risk assessments. We start looking at information related to fire incidents. We need to have audits in place, significant exchange, you know, for part of the soft landing in place, but part of the fire regulations. So the EIR is evolving. It's not just about maintainable assets, BIM processes, as-built data. We're starting to bring in now, through the EIR and AIR, information around fire. We need the fire schematics in place, schedules of testing and maintenance. What do we need to do in there? And it's really down to a project level as well, because fire safety responsibility matrix for the project need to be in place. Who's responsible for providing all this data? It's not the architect, it's not the building services guys, contractors, subcontractors, manufacturers. They're the people that have got the data for the materials they're putting into their products. The contractor needs to prove how it's been installed, what's been installed by who, when, all that needs to be captured. But it starts off with this client with their key documents. So the golden thread, the Building Safety Act and everything, as you can see, goes right the way through. It starts with that client defining what they need. The designer starts to define and push into models some of that information. The contractor needs to prove what's being built, and the owner operator needs to keep it up to date when it's being used, and those things change during maintenance. So it's really key. So let's rewind back to the designer. You know, as a designer, yeah, we build safe buildings. That's my goal. We're producing that information. You know, we're looking for accurate, trusted, single source of truth and security, accountability, all those key words that we look at as a designer, and start looking at, you know, aims of bringing the technology in to produce this information that's needed. Because a designer doesn't want these drops of information at each stage. They're building a design from concept scheme through detailed design, through being built with the contractor. The data needs to flow through it. And you know, this is where we start looking at information. And same as BIM, fire is the same. We need to consider the standards which we're going through today. Look at the graphical and non-graphical information, and you'll see that non-graphical is probably more important than the graphical information as we get into it. Looking at the QA and validation of that data, we need it accurate, we need it as built. We need visualizations and analysis of that data to ensure we've taken into account the safety of things, and we need to store it. So as a designer, we're starting to pull this data together. And if you look at Annex C of the presentation, we start to see some of the documentation that's needed in there, what we need to present. We're doing many of this today, but what we're doing is defining exactly what we need. And the standard itself is putting into place a structure to ensure we've got a checklist of what's needed. And as a designer, it's bringing in more responsibility and more ownership, because each of the elements that's in a model, the standard is now pointing to ownership, where that information is actually coming from, who's putting it in, and what it needs to be against. It's against the finishes now. It's against, the joint movements and fire stopping and, any penetrations and all that good stuff. But who's honing it? And that's what the standard is about, really. If we look at one of the images there, note 2 is specifying that, yes, we've got an external wall, but we're starting to classify it. And as you see down here, we've got REI60. That's a classification put onto that material. And it really starts bringing in different elements of information that we need to, as designers, push into these models. Because the REI60 means that it was a load-bearing wall. It's got integrity and a thermal insulation of 60 minutes. So this information needs to be now captured. We now need to look in at, fire stopping elements, void fillers and rock wool and things like that we're pushing in, and also minimum dimensions that are needed, and that, because they're the regulations that we need to prove. Distance between stairs and, clearance between main structures all need to be accounted for. And also, it's not just about the load bearing, it's about the non-load bearing as well. You can see here now we're pointing at number 4, which is the studded wall. That's got an EI60. It's not a load bearing wall, so it's not got an R in front. It's got EI. So it's integrity and insulation, 60 minutes. That's that internal wall. And then we even get to classification of surfaces, because we need to look at these figures then that need to be pushed into this thing called Fire IE, which we'll come on to. But what those figures are doing is another standard. So EN 13501, which was released in 2018, starts to bring those 3 alignments. It's the grade of the material. How flammable is it? Does it have smoke released if it is ignited? And what droplets? So we start needing to classify not just Uniclass, not just the material codes, but it's actually fire properties. So as you can see here, A2, non-combustible, great. What does the S1 mean? So the S1 means it little or no smoke. And then the D is droplets. So if it is ignited, has it got anything that will drop and reignite onto other surfaces, etc.? That's part of this information we're now asked to provide. And they're all detailed really in ISO 8644. The BS is really pushing this information to us. So as a designer, you can see your information requirements has grown. We're not just after maintainable information now, we're after these fire properties against your materials and against other things that are in the building, which is reacting to fire. And we start looking at these information exchanges. But as we look at the information exchange, you can see the responsibility changes as well. So as you can see these arrows, the responsibility changes between that appointing party, the client, the design team, the contractor, and these information exchange points. So this diagram we've pulled together because it highlights the exchange points, the gateways, and the rebus stages, which are really key. But if you actually go into the standard itself, there is a template which is great. Have a read of it. It's on Annex A, page 53 of the standard. This is a template which goes through every single exchange point, which is highlighted at the bottom here, and what needs to be delivered, the responsible parties, and even down to some of the systems and things we need to collate against it. Great document. Really have a read of that. And if you need help, give me a shout and we can go through it together. And as we move into construction, we need to start capturing evidence now. We're not just looking for as-built information. We need to show how things and penetrations have been stopped, how the cladding has gone in. But more importantly, the information needs to be supported. We need to have it in them safety boxes. The resident may even ask for that information, and all this needs to be retained for between 12 and 15 years, depending on the contract itself. Now, what I'm going to do is fly into something called Fire IE, which is similar to Kobe, and I'll underline again the word similar. Now, I know there's been some bad press about this in media, because if we look at Kobe is a schema aligned to an IFC. It's the way we structure data, the way we push it out into Excel, but it's the IFC schema that's helping us drive Kobe. Fire is slightly different, and I'd like to just get into a discussion with some people around the difference between Kobe and Fire IE, because I do question it, because for me, Fire IE is not Kobe. Kobe is about maintainable assets. Fire IE is about materials more than assets. We're looking at things like cavity barriers, fire collars, intermittent strips on doors, foam filling, glazing, balconies, things that may not even be modelled. So if they're not modelled, they can't be in the IFC, which can't be in a schema like Kobe. So there's things we need to consider there. But the confusion has come is Fire IE was put into the same sort of format as Kobe. And if you start looking into the data behind Fire IE, you can see here's your code at the bottom here, reaction to fire. So this is that code of reaction and smoke and droplets and all that good stuff, and your fire ratings are in there, but it's against that material. Yeah, it's against this paint in this instance, it's the finish. It's not an asset. So lots of things in there. And we start looking at Appendix B in the standard, and that's starting to really break down all the requirements of that information. But you can see here in the standard suggested fire properties. If you look at here, power backup, electrical power backup, how are you going to model that? Can't be in the IFC. Yeah, so we've got to look at some of the data that's been asked for. Where do we capture it? How do we capture it? Because it's not just about the asset. As we're building these things, we have to include inspection test plans, ITPs, other forms of forms that we're filling in, checklists, proof and evidence that we're filling this in correctly, we're installing correctly, we're using the right accountable people to put these things in place into our buildings, and the sign off of that's done, and everyone is safe and that. And also we need to be aware of EWS1, another new standard, PAS 9980, released this year, about the external wall systems. Yeah, and you'll hear things like FRAEW, fire risk appraisal of external walls. So these other people coming into this on the back of the Act, on the back of 8644, specifically for certain things, as you can see, the external wall. So we're now looking at all this other data we're collating. We've got Fire IE, we've got ITPs, inspection test plans, we've got certification, we've got sign off, we've got all these different things that need to be collated. And we start looking at Annex D of the presentation, of the standard, and we start looking at how all this comes together, because it's a lot of the building is being handed over. So it's about what maintainable people need to do. What do the maintenance need to do? What happens in a fire emergency? That's all defined in the standard. And we just need to bring it all together, because basically what we've got is now lots and lots of information that we probably collected but was quite fragmented before. We now need to bring this together. But you can see we've got lots of new information we're collating and documenting in a different way in design. We've got to capture all this evidence of how we fitted, it's as built, we've certified it, we've checked it during construction, and that needs to be passed over to your owner operator so they can keep it up to date as maintenance happens. So there's lots going on. And, the biggest thing for me is, how do we keep all this together? Because we know the what. Yeah, we know what we've got to do now. We've got a standard, we've got the Act, we've got the Golden Thread report. We know the why we're doing this. We've got to build these buildings like we should be doing. How the heck are we going to pull all this together? So as we get into this, start to think about what's happening. because that information needs to be passed around, and it's really important to think about the owner operator. Are they the owner of the building, or is it a developer you're doing the project for? The owner, great, we can provide them the data, we can structure the data in their systems, they've got it, they can distribute it to residents, the fire engineer, the fire officers. If it's a developer, the first thing they're going to do is sell the building to somebody. That data has got to go with it. So we've got to think of how this data is passed around with the building to the relevant people, and that's part of the standard. So just consider that when you're doing your tender responses of where's the data going and how we're going to hand this thing over, because it's got to live with the building for 15 years, etc. Now we have got tools, yeah, and there are plugins to Revit that will help during that design phase. If you look at the BIM fire tool, it's going to help us put the signage in place, the fire ratings on the doors, the walls, all that good stuff is going to become quicker and easier as we get into this process, and it'll integrate into your BIM as well. So it'll start and assist us to create the correct drawings that's needed as part of the standard. But that's just design. When we get into construction, we've got to collate it all, not just the drawings that's being generated out the likes of BIMfire. We've got to collate it in a construction cloud. Now, the Autodesk Construction Cloud, what we can do here is, because things may not be modeled, we can put placeholders, fire dampers, fire collars, kitchen extract systems, all sorts of things there, and we tag them. But each tag has got inspection test plans connected to it. It's got the certification, it's got the drawings, it's got the evidence and photographs. But I've got a problem with photographs, and it's always that if you go on site and take a photo, you always miss it. You always miss something. So what we're looking at is something called Oculo there as well. And this can all be brought together and linked in that construction cloud, because Oculo will allow us to walk around the site with a 360 continual video stream capturing where we walk. We can walk that site every week and capture everything, because then what it'll do is it'll capture the build up of that wall as we construct it. We've got the evidence, we've got the material shown, we can see how it was actually constructed on site, but it's linked. That's linked to that external wall orange pin drop that we've put on. And with it is all the certification, the drawings, the sign-offs, is all in one. That can now be passed to the relevant people to see. And this 360 imagery is great because think of Google Maps. It'll track where you've walked on site. You can spin the model at any point. You can nudge yourself along. It's not photographs. It's a continual video stream, so you can move along. And as you can see, you can put dates at the side, so you can see that wall being constructed. But at the same time, you can put the BIM model at the side. And see here, just a quick demo of this. You can see I can click any of these yellow spots to place me in the building. I can see that I'm in April. I can see how it looked in April. I can now change the date. What did it look like in January? Well, I've just got the restraints holding up before the steelwork went in. It's holding the slab up and things like that. So I've now got this evidence of how this thing was built, how it was put together, right the way through from December, when I was just putting the slab and the shell was just being generated going up there. And you may say, well, actually, you're not capturing the evidence and the detail that we need. Well, actually, when you take your camera out and take a photo, it's linked to that camera. So it positions a 13 megapixel photograph with the image as well. So we can start capturing labels and all that good stuff. And as I said, this data has got to be as built. So what we're looking at as well is bringing that model in. Now, using artificial intelligence, it's binding, and through logarithms, it's binding that model to position it in exactly the same place as the image. So now we've got a view really to make sure that we're producing as built data. We've installed it the way it's supposed to be designed, which is part of the BS8644. We've got evidence that it's built in the way it was designed, and we've got all that data collated together, because we can start looking at reports. Because I might want to see all the safety fire sensors installed, say. So I can click this, and by clicking through the model, I can see where they're actually installed on site. making sure that it's built as designed. That's what's been signed off through the gateways. And I can start creating reports on these penetrations, on different things like that, because I can create this report on all those types of assets. And you can see here now I've got the actual walk on the left and the asset on the right. And I can see and check what's been installed, has it been installed correctly? And I can start getting progress reports. So I can see where I am, and I've got all this evidence to the fire engineer and officer that's going to come in and sign my Gateway 3 off. I've got all this evidence captured, proven, and brought together. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an insight into where we are with the Building Safety Act and the new standard. We've got it live on a few projects currently. We're putting what you've seen today into action. But yeah, please reach out, and if we can help, great, because there's lots there. And as Rich said, we're all not experts yet. We're all learning this. This is BIM 10 years ago. You know, we're trying to get into the industry and get it in the best way that we can deliver. But the main thing is get you guys through these gateways, so we can still deliver the buildings, but we're producing better data and information as we deliver it. Okay, so thanks for listening. I'll pass you back to Rich.
Yeah, thanks very much, Steve. That's fantastic. Hopefully everybody on the call's now got a bit of a better insight into the BS8644-1 standard, some of the gateways around Building Safety Act. Just to say, Symetri have a follow-up event coming where we can explore the technology side of things a little bit better. It's spinning around on the show reel just now. It's on the 20th of October. We'll really dig into, I think, the how question Steve raised in a little bit more detail. We've got our partners from Oculo, BIMfire, and Autodesk Construction Cloud joining us there. Thanks everybody for joining. Hopefully we'll have some more conversations moving forwards. As mentioned a few times, I'd urge you to work together. You know, owners, architects, contractors, speak to each other, understand your needs, and get Symetri involved where required.